And we'll have more on the opening of the impeachment inquiry just ahead. But now to new numbers out this morning in the 2020 presidential race. According to the latest Quinnipiac University national poll, Senator Elizabeth Warren is essentially tied with former Vice President Joe Biden. Warren now leads the 2020 Democratic field with 27%, up 8 points since last month, followed by Joe Biden, who is down 7 points, now sitting at 25%. Though within the margin of error, it is the first time a candidate other than Biden has held the numerical lead nationally. Senator Bernie Sanders comes in third with 16%, followed by South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg with 7%. Senator Kamala Harris gets 3%. No other candidate tops 2% on the state level. The latest Monmouth poll shows Senator Elizabeth Warren and former Vice President Joe Biden running neck and neck in New Hampshire, just 2 points apart. Warren stands at 27% of support among those early state voters, up 19 points since May. Biden is down 11 points to 25%. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders also saw his polling slide over the summer, down 6 points to 12%. The poll also shows Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard at 2%, earning her a spot on next month's debate stage. And in Nevada, Biden narrowly leads the Democratic field by 4 points at 23%. Warren follows in second place with 19% of likely Democratic caucus goers' support. And Sanders rounds out the top three with 14%. What do you make of this?
Well, I'll tell you what, when I was running for office and had polls taken, I usually didn't look at the bottom line. I looked at trend lines. Was I going up?
Exactly.
Was I going down? And I always told my staff I didn't care about the sample size. What I cared about was how did I look from 1 month to the next or 1 year to the next. And John Heilemann, by that measurement, the Biden campaign has to be very concerned. We showed the New Hampshire poll that showed Elizabeth Warren up 19 points, Joe Biden down 11 points. You can look at the national polls that showed also Elizabeth Warren going to first place, Joe Biden dropping as well. And in just about every poll, Joe Biden has dropped precipitously and Elizabeth Warren is on an uptick. What are your reads on the polls?
Well, I'd say that the first point is the point you just made, Joe, which is that it's just a consistent trend at the national level and in the early states that if you start from when Joe Biden got into the race until today, he had been the front runner on every level until just the last few days. But had been gradually, I'd say, not so much precipitously, but gradually declining over months to the point where now he has dipped below, although this is all within the margin of error. But you could argue right now, given the numbers and given the trajectories, that it's now the case Elizabeth Warren's the front runner. She's the front runner nationally, I think. And most importantly, you look at the gold standard poll, the Register poll from the weekend that put her in first place in Iowa for the first time, and this New Hampshire poll, which I think are going to be reconfirmed by a lot of polling over the course of the next few weeks. You think about the theory of the case for Joe Biden's nomination. He is the inevitable candidate. He is the electable candidate. The inevitable and electable candidate's got to win early, or else the sheen of winner and electability and inevitability gets stripped off. And the biggest problem Joe Biden has right now is the calendar. His firewall, the place where he has this strength, this core strength with African-American voters, is the fourth contest in South Carolina. He's got to get through Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada before he gets to that state. And I'll tell you that you know it better than anybody, Joe. What happens in these races is that there's a whole pre-campaign up until the night that the Iowa caucuses happen. And then you wake up the next day, and the amount of free media that gets generated by the winner of those caucuses and who comes in second and third overwhelms everything that's happened for the last year and a half. So Joe Biden doesn't win the Iowa caucuses and then is looking at New Hampshire, where he's got both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders as home state, home field, neighboring state advantages. It's a very, very tough road if Joe Biden does not win one of those first two states. And the dynamics that will be unleashed upon him are going to be punishing if that happens. And I know the Biden campaign is as aware of this as anybody.
Jeffrey Goldberg, in her speech at Washington Square Park last week here in New York City, Elizabeth Warren made sort of implicit criticism of Joe Biden and the argument for Joe Biden, which was that we can't play it safe and cross our fingers and hope that person wins. We've got to have energy. We've got to have ideas. We've got to be out there, which is what she's done. You can't call these polls outliers anymore. We're seeing poll after poll that shows Senator Warren surging in New Hampshire and Iowa, now nationally, and catching up to Joe Biden. I think even the closest friends of Joe Biden would tell you he's been uneven, to put it mildly, in the debate performances. Is this the accumulation of all that combined with Elizabeth Warren just running a really strong campaign?
Right, and taking 1 million selfies with prospective voters.
Sure.
I was talking to a couple of senators yesterday about this. Senators who are not necessarily overly friendly to Elizabeth Warren, but they said there's a cruel double standard being applied to Biden, but it is what it is, and that is Donald Trump has somehow succeeded in politics so far by saying whatever pops to mind. Total indiscipline, playing this character, the eccentric uncle character. Biden is punished for verbal indiscipline in a way that Donald Trump isn't, and so I think, and this is what these two senators are saying. I said, if he cannot maintain or improve his discipline on that front, and not, to put it in the vernacular, not step in it quite so frequently, he has a fighting chance. But it plays into this. It plays into this notion that he's not disciplined, and for whatever reason, we could sit here all day and analyze why culturally he doesn't get away with it in the same way that other people get away with it.
But, Jeffrey, I think that everything that has happened in the past 24, 48 hours, the past week, has actually, and there is debate here as to whether or not this is going to be politically perilous, but has actually played into Biden's strengths. Yamiche, Joe Biden can talk about this Ukraine issue. He can talk about why it's wrong, what the president is doing. He can talk about his work that he's done in the foreign policy field. It shows his strengths, and it shows this need for sanity again, need for things to be back in place in Washington and for things to be done right. Biden's message is that he can give people the comfort level that things are going to run well in Washington, and perhaps appeal to voters who might not vote for Elizabeth Warren. What are the risks and the gains of this Ukraine story for the Joe Biden campaign?
The risks, of course, are that people are going to be looking more into Hunter Biden and looking more into the relationship between him and his father, and really dissecting his relationship with Ukraine while his father was vice president. The gains, of course, are that Joe Biden now is at the center of what could be an impeachment, actual impeachment hearing, an impeachment proceeding of the President Trump. So what he has is something that he can talk about over and over again and be at the top of all the news cycles and be at the top of mind of a lot of voters. I was just down in South Carolina, though, talking to a lot of voters. That's going to be a critical state for Democrats in this primary. The electorate there is majority African American. Joe Biden has strong numbers there. But when I was talking to voters, they said, look, we're not going to hold the Democratic candidate to the same standards as Donald Trump. We don't want someone who says whatever comes to mind. We don't want someone who's always having gaffes. We want someone who's going to be clear-minded, who's going to make us all feel like the country's back to being normal. And Joe Biden seems a little off. These are people who are Joe Biden supporters. And then they told me, hey, that woman, Elizabeth Warren, she seems really feisty. She seems like someone who's, if she's on this debate stage with President Trump, she could go toe-to-toe with him. So that's Elizabeth Warren's strength there. And I should say, I talked to Senator Harris about this. She's someone who a lot of people are looking at in South Carolina, but a lot of people simply did not know her name and simply did not know Pete Buttigieg's name. I have all sorts of interviews where I talked to people and said, let me just name all the people running for president. Half the people, they were like, I don't know who that is. I don't know who Cory Booker is. It was surprising to me because I think in Washington, we know who all these people are. Most voters are still like, we know about 3 people, and Senator Harris and Pete Buttigieg, they're not people we're even looking at.
Walter Isaacson, you've covered a lot of campaigns. When do you think the resentment factor might, if it will kick in, with Bernie Sanders towards Elizabeth Warren?
Well, I think it'll kick in, but I think Bernie Sanders is starting to go down, which gives it a great upside potential for Elizabeth Warren. I'm somewhat surprised. I'm down here in my home in Louisiana, and been traveling around and mixing with a more diverse crew than I usually do sometimes traveling around. And it's somewhat interesting that people are so fed up with everything happening in Washington that that's weirdly playing to Elizabeth Warren's advantage, which is that all this sort of craziness, can't we now get beyond it? And also the populist resentment that you really feel in a state like Louisiana, that populist resentment is not necessarily all on the right. It's sort of a vague populism, like all those people in Washington and all those people who've been skimming off the cream from a good economy and all those people who've been exporting our jobs, a pox on all their houses. I am not surprised to see the rise of Elizabeth Warren in places you don't expect it.
And Joe and Meek, I just drop in a couple more numbers from this Q poll this morning. President Trump has a 40% approval rating. If you look at him over this entire year, he just doesn't move. The floor is 38% in this poll. The ceiling is 42%. He's a 40% president right in there from January forward through the Mueller report, the Mueller testimony, and also a 32% approval rating for President Trump, 32% among independent voters.
All right, Walter Isaacson, thank you so much. And Jeffrey Goldberg, thank you as well. The Atlantic Festival is going on right now in Washington, D.C., and you can still get a couple of tickets left at theatlanticfestival.com. Jeffrey, thank you. And still ahead on Morning Joe, Senator Chris Coons says Trump's allegations against Joe Biden are like the Clinton email saga all over again. But that issue didn't exactly work out for Democrats in 2016. Is there a parallel this time around? The senator joins our conversation next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.